all part of the plan.
Zero.
But when I say the plan...
5, you are coming with me.
On the 5th of November that shall never, ever be forgotten.
We're back. At last, we've arrived. Welcome to V for Vendetta Part 4, Masquerading Dissent Part 1. You must have known this one couldn't be contained to one video. In Parts 1 through 3, we've been discussing V for Vendetta's legacy as a very competent work that just seems to have something missing, which we surmise is a genuine emotional connection with the audience, due to not enough backstory being shown to engage with the characters, and plotting that prioritized the logical stacking of as many threads from the comic as possible over delivering a moving story. But buckle your safety belts, because here's where things really go sideways, as we move on to the aspect of V for Vendetta that supposedly shines and makes a crowning contribution to the cultural landscape: its politics. Even those who may acknowledge that the dramatic narrative didn't wholly resonate with them still praise V for Vendetta's political overtones as speaking truth to power at the time, and even prophesying a few societal issues that have materialized since its release. So is it really the case that the social commentary is where they manage to connect with the viewer? Or is that dense, dark cloud of misplaced priorities still there, looming over this part of the film too?
Oh, okay. I see where you're going with this one.
Now, some movies have no place whatsoever for politics.
They're putting children in cages
for breaking the law.
In others, they work great as a backdrop.
I say good business is where you find it.
And then there's a specimen like V for Vendetta, whose subversive protagonist's motives are born out of the affairs of a totalitarian state, thus bringing the politics front and center in the narrative, and placing itself squarely in the dystopian subgenre. Now, when you take on one of these, you also take on certain expectations. And what are those? I'll take this one if you dullards don't mind. The painfully obvious conundrum here is that V for Vendetta, like every story of a rebel uprising that unseats a despotic ruler, carries a heavy burden of answering the question, what now? You've ousted the oppressors, but what sort of system or structure are you going to replace them with? What happens the next day? What would V for Vendetta Part 2, not to be confused with this tripe, look like? Hey, why does he sound different all of a sudden? He sounds more like me. Moving on. Glad you asked, because we're not going to answer. That's not what we're here to discuss, Professor Buzzkill. It's a story, first and foremost. As far as the politics go, that side of it can often adequately seek refuge in just showing what they don't want. How they go about confronting it is important, and we're coming to that. But installing some post-plot regime to renovate the society into an idealized paradise and proselytize the writer's agenda is not among the expectations. It's no more V for Vendetta's cross to bear than it was Return of the Jedis, the final legitimate entry in that saga, Hunger Games Mockingjay Part 2s, with the stylish idea to split sequels, They Lives, or Red Dawns. Pure claptrap. If any piece of media doesn't leave the masses with a didactic prescription on how to centrally plan their society and how to live their lives, then why was it made?
Yeah. How are we supposed to know what to do and what to believe?
Use your critical faculties to think for yourself?
That's hate speech.
Oh my God. Quite right. This is why consultants with the proper academic credentials are indispensable in forming just the right kind of society. Speaking of tyrannical motives, dystopian parables, though set in a futuristic or imaginary setting, typically entail the writer's commentary on the politics of the here and now, forecasting that certain policies or movements are sure to lead to some dire societal fallout if the present course continues. This notion is normally couched in a state that's slid into extreme despotism. In V for Vendetta, of course, this is Norse fire. a ruling party represented by a cornucopia of impressive, if familiar, imagery. Nazis, Orwellian, Brave New World, others we're not aware of. Plus, both the original author of the comics back in 1980s England and the Wachowskis in early 2000s America properly drew upon real-life current events to comment on, namely neoconservatism taken to its absolute extreme. And so, what do we get? An ethno-nationalist surveillance police state whose citizens have been whittled down to only white Christian heterosexuals and reduced to subjugated cattle that are kept brainwashed, bewildered, and docile through constant propaganda, censorship, curfews, brutal enforcement measures, and genocidal ploys to reinforce the status quo, all the while being spied on to monitor for threats to the party's hegemony. And of course, it's all sold in the name of public safety and national security. So far, so good, or seemingly so. We have a well-constructed authoritarian regime that's evil to the core, commenting on state surveillance versus personal privacy, immigration, foreign policy, free speech, systemic discrimination, and medical autonomy, among other timely issues. Now, on the flip side, we need a rebel protagonist who sees or comes to see that the system isn't what it's cracked up to be, and turns against it, seeking to subvert it, by means ranging from mere avoidance, to escape, to bringing the whole thing down.
Remember me?
Sometimes they succeed, and other times the almighty incumbency is too much to overcome and they're subsumed, maybe even made an example of. But either way, the point is made, which is usually something along the lines of, better to brave the inevitable uncertainties of freedom than be duped into bondage by the false certainties of state control. And this, of course, is the titular V, a political prisoner who managed to escape Norsefire's clutches and then declare war on them, hatching an elaborate scheme to undermine, terrorize, and eventually eradicate them through sabotage, counter-propaganda, and assassination. His characterization addresses the concept of terrorism, the implications of widespread apathy to governmental overreach, and more. So, like with most components of V for Vendetta, all the pieces seem to be in place here. But trust us.
Houston, we have a problem.
If we take a look at some dystopian movies that really nailed it, we find that they all share something in common. Beyond the surface-level commentary, they really go after something that lies at the very core of the authoritarian mechanism. And the conflict around this factor comes to define the film's tyrant versus revolutionary dynamic. In 1984, a paragon of the subgenre, that conflict is top-down thought control versus independent judgment. Big Brother corrals the entire population of Oceania into uniformity of belief and values on everything from dress, to language, to resource consumption, morning exercise routine, media ingested, who to hate, who to love, and most importantly, what to cognitively accept as the truth. The party says 2 + 2 = 5, then it does. Winston Smith's wily nature sets him on a divergent path from Big Brother's proclaimed reality. He dodges the surveillance, expresses his own thoughts on paper.
Freedom is the freedom to say 2 + 2 = 4.
Gets embroiled in a whirlwind romance with like-minded Julia, and joins a supposed dissident underground movement via supposed double agent O'Brien, all in accordance with his inherent drive to conduct his existence by his own discernment. Things don't ultimately go so well for him, but it's heavily implied that he's not the first to go down this road. And despite the party's merciless efforts at deterrent retribution, he likely won't be the last. In Mad Max Fury Road, it's objectification versus personal sovereignty. Immortan Joe lives like a king on his claimed patch of post-apocalyptic desert by reducing everyone and everything around him to resources under his control, until his trusted lieutenant, Furiosa, throws off his yoke, deserts her post, and smuggles out Joe's most precious resource of all, and only chance of a legacy, his harem of wives, who have renounced his objectification under a new mantra.
We are not things! We are not things!
His desperate crusade to reclaim them by force just proves to be his undoing.
Remember me?
The tyranny of Blade Runner is based on systemic discrimination versus assimilation. Frank Deckard is tasked with hunting down and eliminating 4 rogue humanoid replicants who were created too advanced for their own good by a corporatized state that would rather not take responsibility for its invention. So they've since been enslaved and mandated to live off-world, deemed too dangerous to coexist with humanity on Earth after a mutiny by some who were dissatisfied with their existence as labor drones. This treatment has evoked in the escapees their own intolerance of humanity. So they kill with impunity. After ample collateral damage, the stereotypes are defied, and the line between man and machine blurred through Deckard's investigation, when the replicant's motives and actions prove much more human than some of the humans who sent him, which drives him to escape that world and embark on an inter-biotechnological relationship with a replicant. The Matrix, the game-changing classic by the same writers, centers on complacency versus self-determination. Human freedom is subverted by a computer-simulated reality that subsists by the people's near-universal acceptance of the status quo. A mundane, artificial existence that keeps them on just the right regimen of highs, lows, and nothing too remarkable. Until working stiff Thomas Anderson, who moonlights as Hacker Neo, senses that something is wrong with this world, follows the White Rabbit, and in a dramatic, ceremonious fork in the road, takes the red pill to escape the simulation and join a rabble of cyber freedom fighters on a quest to terminate the program, rather than the blue pill that would restore his complacency and confine him forever to comfortable servility. See what we mean? It's not a simple matter of the hero protesting or attacking the establishment's propaganda, infrastructure, or agents. These things usually happen, and there are always several complex overlapping political factors, but there's invariably that one central tenet identified by the storyteller consciously or unconsciously, and later dug out by YouTubers with too much time on their hands, at the deepest, most elemental level. That is what they must attack, so that should they succeed, not only are the immediate despots eliminated, but the regimes receive such a crushing blow that if it's not destroyed, it will never be the same again. If they get this right, then we have a fully developed ideological conflict where the two sides fundamentally clash at every turn, resulting in a dystopian masterwork. If they miss the mark, well, we're getting to that. So with all this in mind, tell me, what is that central conflict behind the political oppression in V for Vendetta? It obviously shares some notions with several of our examples, but what's at the center?
The true genius of the plan was the fear. Fear got the best of you, and in your panic you turned to the now High Chancellor Adam Sutler. He promised you order, he promised you peace, and all he demanded in return was your silent, obedient consent.
Then you have no fear anymore. You're completely free.
Okay.
Seems fairly obvious.
This is what they're going with. Something like fear versus courage. Norse Fire generated fear of the St. Mary's virus, then fear of their own institutional wrath for any infraction, and on top of that, managed to generate a fear of the dangers that would supposedly befall the people in the absence of Norse Fire's quote-unquote leadership. And here's V, who shed his fear in the torture cells of Lark Hill, then put Evie through the same gauntlet to get her on board, after professing to the people that their fear brought about their subjugation, and the way out was for them to find the courage to join him in an uprising and reassert their freedom. Well, there it is. Case closed, right? But, something just doesn't sound right here. What could it be? To answer that, let's start at the beginning. How did Sutler and his party get this far in the first place? V sums it up this way.
Fear became the ultimate tool of this government, and through it, our politician was ultimately appointed to the newly created position of High Chancellor. The rest, as they say, is history.
Ultimate tool. Is that really enough to declare it the root of the oppression? That kind of sounds more like means than an end. Let's look at the steps. They created a problem with a solution only they had.
Imagine a virus, the most terrifying virus you can, and then imagine that you and you alone have the cure.
They used that problem to essentially blackmail the people for political support. After capitalizing on that support, they offered their solution.
Some believed it was the work of God himself, but it was a pharmaceutical company controlled by certain party members.
Curing the virus instilled enough trust and gratitude among the people, who were left so broken down and dependent on the regime that it can now literally get away with anything up to and including murder, evidenced by the fact that Creedy's black bag you and make you disappear tactic seems to be well known and at least partially accepted. And now that they're well entrenched and ruling with an iron fist, widespread unquestioning loyalty and obedience are just now starting to wane, after enduring for an entire generation. You could chalk all this up to fear, but there just seems to be more going on here. Try this on as a thought experiment. What if, instead of fear, Northfire had sold the people on ferocious patriotism, united them against a common enemy they'd been similarly propagandized to hate? Or
fairy tales of eternal economic growth.
Or maybe the altruistic drive towards equality and social justice for all.
Yeah.
See how easy that is? Put any of these in the place of fear, and would anything else need to change for it all to play out? Maybe fear was their most effective option, but the other's mere potential to replace it shows us that the people's fear, while instrumental, wasn't all that this hinged on. So we haven't yet plunged down to the deepest, most fundamental principle at work. V called the fear a tool. A tool for what purpose? This brings us back to the question, how did Northfire take power in the first place?
Hey, doofus! We literally just went over that. They made the virus, then they made...
No, those were the tactics. But what necessitated them? By what process were they actually able to take over? This brings us to something else V said about Sutler's rise.
He's completely single-minded and has no regard for the political process.
This comment might be easy to miss among V's musings, but it actually pinpoints the misidentification of what this is really all about. To what political process is V referring? Why, the election of leaders by majority vote, of course. That most sacred and bulletproof of all political schemes. And Sutler has no regard for this political process? Really? If that were the case, they might have done something like shift the loyalties of the military back when Sutler was Undersecretary of Defense for the Conservative Party, then seize the country in an armed coup, saving themselves a lot of time, effort, and planning. If he'd amassed a dominant enough force, such a thing could have been done with relatively little bloodshed. But he knew better. How did they actually get in? After their little ruse that claimed thousands of innocent lives, they were voted in by 87% of the public. So he had total regard for the political process and went to great pains not to circumvent it because he knew it was something he could harness to work in his favor. Again, if it were all about fear, he could have taken the country by force. But he understood that it's much more powerful to elicit the people's consent and make them think it was their idea. And there's no more effective way to secure that than by co-opting the pre-existing system of majority rule.
Another moot point, misanthropes. This was clearly an illegitimate perversion of the democratic process, where the ignorant masses were deceived by fraudulent claims. This certainly demonstrates why a functioning society must select the right thought leaders and opinion shapers rather than the wrong ones. I can think of a few nominations for each category.
Illegitimate perversion. Granted, it was a sham campaign built on the lie that they were the holders and authors of the solutions to everyone's problems, when they were actually a pack of power-seeking, sociopathic, sadistic tyrants whose only motive was to take over. But, so what? What's the real issue here? Is it that people like this, with motives like this, exist and tend to seek and find their way into influential positions? If so, how do you solve that? Is it that the people at large can be tricked by such a stunt and aren't smart enough to resist it? If so, how do you solve that? Or could it be the system itself, the centralization of power under any pretext, that allows an entire populace to be subjugated by a complete fabrication, so long as 50.1% or the largest pool of them buy it?
pure piffle. Democracy is the embodiment of justice and equality, where the government functions as a reflection of the general will, subordinate to the people.
Yeah? Which people? Let's talk about these people. What happened to them? Probably something along these lines. Or at best, they're among the ranks of the oppressed majority. A lot that was forced on them despite the fact that, for whatever reason, they were unconvinced by Norsefire's claims from the beginning. So the individuals who were privy to something nearer the truth were overpowered and enslaved by those who ate up the lie.
Bollocks.
Well, if you wanted V to be against democracy, did you want him to be a socialist? Who wants to watch that? Ugh. Unbelievable. That is a false dichotomy. You are!
Yeah, whatever.
A consistently fleshed out V would have made a pronounced stance against any such system that gives rise to the coercive rule of some people by others, whether by the government, the majority, whoever, that prioritize groups, organizations, and committees, subordinating the lives, rights, and objectives of the individual, typically at gunpoint, reducing that individual to a sacrificial animal, against whom the most egregious atrocities are justified in the name of some nebulous, elusive,
Greater good.
The greater good.
How can this be for the greater good?
The greater good.
How can this be for the greater good?
The greater good.
Shut it!
This is the doctrine of collectivism. And that, boys and girls, is what lies at the core of Norsefire's tyranny. It comes out in virtually every pronouncement they make towards the citizens.
England prevails.
Tonight, our country, that which we stand for, and all that we hold dear, faces a grave and terrible threat. We must remain steadfast. We must remain determined. But most of all, we must remain united.
These slogans and rhetoric addressing the people as a country, which isn't really a thing, but just a demarcated piece of geography where a bunch of individuals happen to reside, most of them by an accident of birth, is meant to unify the whole population under one umbrella, a cohesive unit neatly ruled by the regime. And so they've come to think of themselves this way, the obedient collectivized personification of a landmass. And the antithesis to all this is not merely telling the people not to be afraid. It's the total obliteration of the collectivist ideal and any of its paradigmatic outgrowths. Radical individualism, whose political corollary is anarchism. So finally, we come to the crucially missing ideological conflict of V for Vendetta: collectivism versus individualism. This may seem an overly broad idea that actually encompasses several of our examples. Fair enough, but examining this one the same way as the others, this is where we landed. So if you think we're off, by all means light us up in the comments. Now this may sound familiar if you read the comic, where it seems that it was something closer to this. There, Norsefire's dogma was avowedly fascism, or governmental control of every aspect of society down to the private lives of each individual. And Comic Book V sought to eliminate them and replace them with nothing, establishing a society he termed the land of do as you please, a clear anarchist stance based not on chaos as is commonly believed, but on individual freedom, unhindered by institutional interference of any kind. Conversely, movie Norsefire's creed is more of a grab bag of every idea the filmmakers found politically objectionable at the time, and comes out as a generic, kind of ultra-conservative, mustache-twirling blanket oppression that was democratically elected, of course. And Movie V? Well, what does he want? As we said, what ultimately comes next doesn't really matter, but V's current designs on it absolutely matter, and we never really get a sense of what those are. But when he says something like this,
has no regard for the political process.
It kind of sounds like he thinks Sutlers should have regard for the political process, which kind of sounds like he does. So does he just want a truer, more consistent, less corrupt version of what they've got? And then there's this.
Alone, a symbol is meaningless, but with enough people, blowing up a building can change the world.
With enough people, a public act of destruction can change the world. Sounds familiar. And this is what really pulls the rug out from under the movie's social commentary. V sounds just as collectivist as his adversaries. More to come on this. The terms fascism, anarchism, and land of do as you please are nowhere to be found in the film. Not seriously, anyway.
Anarchy in the UK!
Which was one of comic writer Alan Moore's chief criticisms of the screenplay. It may not have been fully formed in the comic, as it seems that Moore, a real-life anarchist, may have some socialist tendencies, a subject for another day. But his writing was undoubtedly nearer to this true polarity, perhaps explaining why the comic is widely revered as an essential classic in the genre. And the film? Not quite on that level. Maybe the filmmakers wanted to avoid such radical points of view for wider audience appeal? A grievous error that yielded a conflict between two very ill-defined philosophies. And this points to a much bigger...
Who cares? Sutler's a jerk dictator and V's a freedom fighter, and that's all they need for us to know who to root for and to make the movie good. Anything else is just crap made up by crappy YouTubers for crappy content.
We're not saying that... Ugh. All right, smart guy. You want to forget their ideologies and just look at their actions? Okay, let's do that. With the opportunity to address the people at large, Sutler went on television and told them he'd properly diagnosed their great quandary and had the solution. All they had to do was follow his instructions and it would all be resolved. V went on television and told them he'd properly diagnosed their great quandary and had the solution. All they had to do was follow his instructions and it would all be resolved. Norsefire swindles the masses with propaganda. V swings them back the other way with counter-propaganda, rather than maybe using his airtime to simply expose the truth of what the party was doing. Like in The Running Man, where the good guys escape the highly rated, brutal bread and circus reality show of the same title, seize the station that broadcasts it, and say nothing, but just show the pure, unfiltered truth to the people, leaving them to decide if they trust what they see and what to do about it, letting the chips fall where they may. And of course, they fell towards instant belligerence and dissent among the masses.
Bullshit!
Wrong again, dunces. What you foolishly called for is exactly what V did. He clearly stated,
If you feel as I feel, and if you would seek as I seek, then I ask you to stand beside me.
and so the people opted to throw off their misguided conformity and groupthink for this glorious street demonstration, exercising the choice offered to them by V.
Yeah? Why is choice something that has to be offered from on high? And Sutler gave them a choice too, to vote for him or not, which, according to supporters of such a scheme, is the most important choice of all. And boy did they come through, with another glorious demonstration. And I mean, do these people really look like they've thrown off their conformity and groupthink? But what V didn't do was reveal that the state was behind the St. Mary's virus. Nothing about Prothero and his pharmaceutical company, Creedy's Gambit, none of that. Why was the truth good enough for Inspector Finch, a guy V needed a favor from at the time, but not the people he supposedly intended to liberate? What they got was...
The truth is, there is something terribly wrong with this country. Cruelty and injustice, intolerance and oppression. If you see what I see, if you feel as I feel, then I ask you to stand beside me.
And so the citizenry followed his directions, to the letter, donned their distributed uniforms, and marched in lockstep to do his bidding. So do you see the issue we were alluding to? Between the two sides, when it comes to the enactment of their respective wills, what's the difference? Each has the same underlying objective, to sway the bulk of the people to his cause. The causes aren't the same. V's is forthright, without coercion or malintent, and Sutler's is a lie based on a problem he created. But, once again, for all intents and purposes, who cares? This is all supposedly about the people, who were no less convinced the first time around when Sutler was promising them a literal miracle cure for their big crisis. And they are still blindly following a face from television, because...
He speaks so well!
It yields them a positive result this time, but doesn't represent any sort of progress in the people's capacity for independent critical thought or the will to emancipate themselves. which is the only true path to freedom.
Whatever, losers! V's plan works and that's all that matters. Ends justifies the means.
Well, if they stick with these means, then after Norse fire's out, what's to preclude another such regime from rising up? By making sure everyone can see through a tyrant's well-orchestrated deceit from now on? How do you do that? Or by making sure political candidates making campaign promises are always genuine and honest from now on? You're joking, right? The only hint of them rebelling on their own initiative is here, but it's kind of framed as inconsequential, or maybe even a bad idea. What does it amount to? It makes Sutler angry, which seems like the status quo, and gets him to deploy the troops around Parliament on November 5th, which was likely to happen anyway since V's still at large. It seems to kick off some unrest in the streets, and Finch theorizes that
This is exactly what he wants.
What? Anarchy in the UK!
really? Riots, protests, and petty crime were his vision of resistance to oppression? And subduing a gunman who'd just murdered a child in the streets is a natural gateway to all that? More on this in the next video. So in case you're still cheerleading for this Guy Fawkes parade, let me ask you, is this what ultimately defeats Norsefire? Nope. By the time we get here, that's all been taken care of by a few well-placed behind-the-scenes assassinations on the part of V, rendering this whole charade, if you will, an afterthought. It does nothing to resolve the film's principal political conflict and really has no bearing on the main plot whatsoever. It may come as no surprise that this sequence was not in the comics. It was shoehorned into the movie, despite having nothing to do with and even being at odds with the source material's ultimate theme.
The willingness of you nitwits to repeatedly humiliate yourselves is delicious. This was obviously a diversion orchestrated by V to veer Norsefire's shock troops to this crowd control farce, and away from his underground preparations and Creedy's abduction of Sutler.
Well, that makes some sense, I guess. But the party had already ruled out a train attack as a possibility, and Creedy was unlikely to encounter any resistance no matter what he was up to. I mean, he did manage to get these guys to go along with the whole thing. And are we really to believe that the filmmaker's intention with this sequence was for us to see it as an empty diversion?
Conceivably. But the real empty diversion is this so-called critique that's been entirely aimed at something ancillary to the main plot thread. Bravo!
Yeah, we're gonna move on to the main plot next, but we had to lay this foundation first.
Nothing like a bloated sidetrack to whet the appetite.
Hey, who should the main political points apply to? The near superhuman or the regular folks?
The regular folks exist purely to follow the instructions of their intellectual betters to bring about what they don't yet know is best for them.
Well, horrible as that sounds. It's hard to argue with. He's kinda got us here. Because the filmmakers sacrificed the comics' opposition of collectivism versus individualism, totalitarian government versus no government, they tragically watered down each of these positions to the point where both sides are operating from the same fundamental belief concerning the average citizen, that they are to wait, inert, for some savior to come and fix their society and their lives. So for them, I guess it amounts to follow the right propaganda from the benevolent protector, not the wrong propaganda from the psychopath? Gee, thanks for that. There has to be more to the political messaging of V for Vendetta. Maybe we'll find it in V and Evie's Revolution. And that's where we're going next, in Masquerading Dissent Part 2.
That's where you dunderheads should have started. Everyone knows the path to righteousness is radical political activism.
No justice, no peace.
No peace is right. So that's it for now, but we're far from finished with V for Vendetta's politics.
Oh, wake me when you're true.
Alright, yeah, this one was a long haul after a long wait. We applaud and appreciate you making it to the end. Join us next time as we explore V and Evie's revolution and its real-world implications. The good, the bad, and, well, you know. Until then, don't forget to like, share, tweet, comment, subscribe, and ring the notification bell. And we promise to be back sooner this time. That sounds like a threat. Shh. Thanks for watching.